Welcome to the Letters to Our Unborn Children podcast. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Tara.
This is the podcast companion to our collaborative, research-based visual arts project by the same name that began in January of 2024 to explore a woman's decision not to have children in this lifetime through a unique lens.
If you could have a conversation with the children you decided not to have, what would you say to them? We asked survey participants to answer this question by writing a letter to their unborn, never born children. Using these anonymous letters, we created 12 large paintings representing letters from 12 archetypal would-be mothers.
This mini-series podcast will dive further into the project with conversations about our creative process and research, as well as interviews with women who were involved in the survey and the private video chat group community, as well as women who have been doing work in this community for a while that have inspired us along the way. To learn more about this project, go to letterstoourunbornchildren.com. Dear Unborn, I can't think of anything meaner than bringing a child into this world. I don't want to inflict more suffering. There's enough pain already. This world is not a world I'd want you to grow up in. Life is all risk and leaps of faith. This is one of mine. It was the result of many small decisions. I do not believe it ethical to bring a life into the world based on any decision explored from a place of pain or emotional compulsion. I believe children should be brought into this world by people who truly want them. There is not a safe or secure place here for you right now. I would love your empathy for the world, but feel guilty for making another broken heart. If you were like me, your heart would break too, in a constant state of kind of broken. You would be a gift to me and to the world, but I just don't feel like you'd be getting the same extraordinary gift in return. Love, Mother Strategist. Hi, Tara. Welcome back.
Welcome back, Sarah. Welcome back. It's hard to believe it's already the 4th episode.
I know. Man, that letter, I just don't feel like you'd be getting the same extraordinary gift in return.
It's a gut puncher.
Whew.
It's a gut puncher.
Yeah, this is another one of those that's like, again, these are all compiled from a lot of different surveys, so it's not like one person said all of this, but a lot of people said all of these things. And, because it was an anonymous survey, people were able to be very direct and very honest about the thoughts that have run through their head when they're making this decision. And this is another one of those that's like, ooh, should I be saying this out loud?
Yes. One of the things that continues to come up for me every time I read one of these letters or hear one of these letters read is how some of these quotes are articulating things that I have known or thought, but just haven't really had the words for, or maybe haven't even had the courage to admit to myself.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. A lot of times, some of these letters, especially these more direct ones, I'm like, those are thoughts that I was even too scared to say out loud inside my own brain.
Yes.
Like, whoa. But it's honest.
It's so honest.
And, we've had now conversations with mothers who have seen some of these letters and read some of these things. And we've had mothers of children say to us, like, I've had these thoughts too.
Yeah.
So it's a universal thing to think these things. And so I think saying it out loud, there's like a weird kind of release or like healing in just owning up to these deep little dark kind of secrets.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Not secret. Putting the light on them.
Putting the light on them. Yes. Well, so the strategist. So this is one of the archetypes behind these letters, which we developed, when we were putting the letters together and figuring out which excerpts went with which pile and finding the themes and then realizing the themes represented an archetype of a potential mother. So this is the strategist. So The strategist archetype represents the master planner, someone who excels at navigating complex situations with foresight, precision, and calculated decision making. So some characteristics of this archetype are strategic thinking, patience, timing, optimism and confidence, resourcefulness, risk management, flexibility and adaptability, and wisdom and insight.
I relate to all of those things.
I know. I'm like, ooh.
But every time we go through the characteristics of an archetype, of any of these archetypes, I'm like, I relate to all of that. I think it's just the universality of the archetypes, right? It's
Yeah.
just,
I think so. I mean, I can find a little of myself in every Enneagram number, and I can find a little of myself in every Myers-Briggs thing. Like, yes,
we are multifaceted.
yes, we are.
Well, I would like to introduce our guest, Meghan Daum. And let's share a little bit with our listeners about her, and then we'll share a little bit about the book of hers that we use. So Meghan Daum is the creator and host of the Unspeakable Podcast and the author of 6 books, most recently, The Problem with Everything, My Journey Through the New Culture Wars, which was a New York Times notable book for 2019. Her collection of original essays, The Unspeakable and Other Subjects of Discussion, won the 2015 Penn Center USA Award for Creative Nonfiction. And she was a Los Angeles Times opinion columnist from 2005 to 2016. She's written for numerous magazines, including The New Yorker, New York Times Magazine, The Atlantic, and Vogue. Meghan is the recipient of a 2015 Guggenheim Fellowship and a 2016 National Endowment for the Arts grant. And I'm not done. She's taught graduate writing students at Columbia University and the University of Iowa, and now teaches private workshops in personal essay, memoir, and op-ed. And in 2022, she founded the Unspeakeasy, an intellectual community for free-thinking women and occasionally men. Her next book is a collection of essays entitled The Catastrophe Hour, and that will be published in April of 2025. She is a busy woman. She's a boss lady, obviously. A lady boss. Boss lady, lady boss. But anyway, she's a badass. Now, the book that we used in our letters group, in our Marco Polo's letter group, we ended up using one of her books for a book study. And this came out 10 years ago. It's called Selfish, Shallow, and Self-Absorbed, 16 Writers on the Decision Not to Have Kids. And so, like I said, this came out 10 years ago. Sarah, you came upon this book. How did you come upon this book?
Well, when we first started talking about this project and we're like, oh, we have so much research to do. So this was back in, I think this was, December 2023. Of course, my first thing was like, let's Google all the books and articles. And so we started compiling a bunch of stuff, and I found this one and I was like, oh, this is so similar to the setup for our project, because Meghan, outsourced and went and got a bunch of people, writers and artists and stuff, to write about their personal experiences, just like we were about to launch this anonymous survey to ask other people to share about their experience of making this decision. So it was so exciting to see that, a decade ago, someone had already been like, hey, I want to collect some stories and represent them and present these stories to the world. And so we got a copy of the book, and you and I read it together through first.
And then when we started the Marco Polo private chat group, we revisited this book because we thought, oh my gosh, this would be such a fun book club book. Just take it essay by essay. And each essay has such a different flavor. And there are 16 different essays, 16 different writers, 3 of whom are men. And so, some of the essays are sad, some of them are hilarious, some of them are snarky, some of them are serious. I mean, it really is a wide ranging in the tone. And so It was such a fun book to do with the group for the book club. So we are so excited to have Meghan on here and chatting with us today. She's super, super interesting and wicked smart. And
Thank you so much for being here,
Meghan.
So excited. Your book, Selfish, Shallow, and Self-Absorbed, 16 Writers on the Decision Not to Have Kids, was this like incredible godsend that fell out of the skies about a few weeks after we launched our project. We laughed about this line in your introduction that the decision not to have kids, people who make that choice are a bit like Unitarians and non-native Californians. We tend to arrive at our destination via our own meandering, sometimes agonizing paths. And yeah, just like so spot on, immediately so comforting to see this project that had come out in the world just a decade earlier. In the introduction, you say, it's about time we stop mistaking self-knowledge for self-absorption. And here we are a decade later. Do you feel like, in your experience since putting this book together, do you feel like it has changed at all? Or do we still see that people who decide not to have kids are largely judged as being selfish, shallow, self-absorbed?
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words. It's been almost a decade since that book came out, and I haven't talked about it as much in the last couple of years as I had been. I think a lot has changed. So the book came out in 2015. I was putting it together in, 2013, 2014. A lot of the discourse around choosing not to have kids was exactly this. Like, you're selfish, you're materialistic, you don't want to love anybody, you'll never know what love is, or you're never fully an adult until you become a parent. But a lot of the reason that I wanted to do the book was that I felt that people who had chosen not to have kids had really bad PR. And by the way, I had wanted to do this project for years and years and years, and everybody in publishing, from my agent to editors, various publishers, said there's no audience for this book. Nobody will want this. And I kept saying, no, no, no. Even parents are interested in this. Maybe even especially parents. So what frustrated me was the way there was such a stigma around just saying, this is not for me, or like, there's other things I want to do, that people who had chosen not to have kids would just be very glib about it. They would say, oh, I would rather take exotic vacations, or my child has 4 legs and eats out of a bowl on the floor. Ha ha ha. And nobody ever decided not to have kids so that they could go on expensive vacations. Like, I just don't buy that. But it was remarkable that it was somehow more socially acceptable to call yourself selfish, shallow, and self-absorbed than to just say, I think this is a really hard job and a really important job, and only people who want to do it should do it. And so I wanted to reframe the discussion. And so, I went about trying to find people, writers, because this was a book, who would talk about it.
Yeah, and I feel like at that time, I mean, even just in the research, like, there haven't been that many collective, collaborative projects like this where a bunch of child-free by choice people have gotten together and sort of come out together and said, hey, we're going to talk about this openly and honestly. And as a collective, there's books about the history of it. There's one-off articles. There's interviews with people. But that process of quickly creating a community around this project and using art to talk about it, that must have been really difficult. Even 10 years ago doesn't seem like that long ago, but in some ways it's a long time ago for this conversation.
Well, yeah. And I mean, to answer your first question, I think now it has become, especially with kind of, younger millennials or Gen Z, to say I'm not going to have kids because of climate change or just kind of apocalyptic notions. And there's a whole kind of conversation around a more anti-natalist approach, and we can talk about that in a little bit. And then of course, there's this new pronatalism that's come up in reaction to it, which I have a lot to say about, actually. But Yeah, I wanted to talk with people who had consciously made the decision not to have kids. I mean, also where this gets confused is a lot of people sort of do want kids and then find that they can't, or maybe they really want kids and they find out that they can't. So they are childless or whatever, and but not by choice. And I think it's very important to make that distinction. So I wanted to find people who, had gone through the process, but very much by choice. They were ambivalent to begin with, and then they had, settled into this place. Or some of them knew from the get-go they never wanted kids. They were very clear about it. There's kind of different typologies around this, and it can shift a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I do think it was a lot more unusual to talk about it 10 years ago, and now it's almost like the other way around. People who do want kids and who are very clear about it and say, especially women, they say, well, I want to find somebody, I want to settle down, I want to start having kids in my 20s. I think that was stigmatized also, especially in more educated sort of urban circles, that became hard for people to talk about. And so then you get this like, backlash. So I don't know, it's all very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, God, it's you're just touching on so many things that we've like talked about and researched and already that you probably experienced too in putting your project together. I'm gonna jump to this question. So in one of your essays, one of the essays in the book, Jeannie Safer,
Yeah.
she described not wanting a baby, but wanting to have a baby. And you write in the introduction that like that really took your breath away, and you were like, oh gosh, that's exactly how I feel. So since you didn't have an essay in the book, you wrote the introduction, you put it all together. I'm just curious. We want to know, you were not an affirmative no necessarily regarding wanting to have children. So would you feel comfortable sharing about the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was in unconscious affirmative no. So the part of the reason I don't have an essay in the book, I did write the introduction, is because I have written about this elsewhere in my book, The Unspeakable, which came out in 2014. I have an essay in there just about, struggles in my marriage around this. And so, my husband and we got married a little, later. We were in our mid-30s when we met, and I think we were both ambivalent. I mean, it's not obviously like you don't get to be 35, 36, and we didn't get married till I was 39. Clearly it wasn't a priority, but I think he moved more toward wanting it, and I moved away from that. And yeah, it became this incredibly sad thing in our marriage. I mean, I wrote about and this is a little bit off topic, but also germane, like this idea of the central sadness. There was something in our marriage that was just this baseline, not rancor or animosity, but just deep sadness. And yeah, I wanted to want a baby. I wished I could get with the program. I mean, it would have made life easier in some ways, but ultimately, I know that it would have made life harder because I would be trying to talk myself into something that I didn't want. I mean, it's ultimately it's profoundly unfair to the child to have that child because you feel obligated to do it. Now, people have been doing that for millennia. So obviously, this is a survivable condition. And a lot of people who think they don't want kids have them and love it and say, oh, I was wrong. Like, thank God I went ahead and did this anyway. So there are obviously all kinds of outcomes. Just for me, it wasn't a chance worth taking. And sadly, the marriage did not last for a lot of reasons. That was kind of the most legible reason. But yeah, it was heartbreaking, but ultimately the right thing.
Yeah. And one thing that we've experienced it personally, finding in the research, the title of your book, all these comments about being selfish, self-absorbed, shallow, all of this. But I wanted to touch on the idea of reproductive duty. And so like, because I'm a woman, it's my assumed duty, not necessarily by everybody, but in general, that I'm going to have kids. And I understand where it came from historically and culturally, et cetera, but I don't I don't think reproductive duty is necessarily like as relevant as it once was. But this makes me think of like legacy and generativity and like what we leave behind. And a generativity in parental generativity, like nurturing or teaching, creating, mentoring, those sorts of things. And so many women who participated in our survey work or have worked in fields that are in some kind of helping role. Um, and so that all of that being said, um, you are a wordsmith, and I assume you love words and language. I mean, I love how you write. Um, and I love words and language. And one of the things I love about language is that it's a bit of a moving target. It's constantly shifting and changing. It keeps me on my toes. And so we talk about language a lot in this podcast. It was something that we found through our research that kept coming up, and just realized how important it is. And one of the words that we're really exploring with this project and in this podcast is the word mother. And what does that even mean? Like mother as a noun, mother as a role, mother as a verb, um, and how mother, that when it's used as a noun or a role, can even be really restrictive. But then mothering as a verb, it's more expansive, and that anyone can be mothering. Um, so do you have any thoughts or takes on that, on mother or mothering, or just this language that we use around parenting in general? And it's kind of a broad question.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly don't think of myself as a motherly person. I guess, yeah, I mean, obviously a mother, I don't know what like you would have to, whatever the Latin root is. I mean, obviously there's a mothership, like on the computer, there's a motherboard, like it is a sort of central vessel out of which other things spring and evolve, right? So that would make sense. I mean, I guess, as I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking a lot about like the role of creativity here. I mean, we're artists, and that's really lucky. Like, to have another creative outlet and to feel like you're leaving something behind, whether or not anyone's actually really going to care about what you leave behind, but we can choose to believe that it will be there. I mean, it's a rare thing to be able to devote your life, or at least you know, give a lot of your life to some kind of creative output that does matter to people and that will be there when you're gone. And most people don't have that. And so I do think it's like when people who are creative talk about this subject, I do think we have to be mindful about like, I hate to use this word, but the privileged position that we're in. And one of the criticisms of the anthology was that, oh, well, these are all writers writing about this. So like they have other, they have their books and they have other things they're thinking about. And this is not like a typical cognitive profile, for anybody. Like these are outliers in a way. And that's absolutely true. The thing is like writers are the ones in the world who write about things, or at least they were 10 years ago. I think now it's maybe people who talk on podcasts, but I wanted to have like written material about this subject. Like I thought about doing a thing where it was more of an oral history where I went around and talked to, quote unquote, normal people about this choice. And I think that would be a fascinating project. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like what you leave behind, I think people just need to think hard about that and also recognize, quite frankly, that most people do want to have kids and most people will have them. And we are outliers. We're not the norm. And that's fine. That's good. One of the problems that I had with the, so-called child-free movement was this sort of idea that I think a lot of people had that like they should convince people not to have kids, or that they should sort of, try to get them to tap into their inner non-parent, and I do think some people have kids when they shouldn't, obviously, and there are a lot of people who have felt pressured to do it, and it's definitely worth thinking about. But this idea that somehow there are like so many people out there who have kids and wish they didn't, or really secretly don't want them but feel they have to have them, I think there's less and less in that. And so to just be clear that we're not the norm, and that's okay. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I love that. And you do such a good job in setting up that book to say that exactly that. Like, we're not trying to say that there's sides here. It's just we're trying to validate the experience and the option, option of living your life without procreation. You said something about, thinking like child-free people needed this book, wanted this book, but also that parents maybe especially needed and wanted this book, or a space to read about and, hear people talk about some stuff that maybe they never had a chance to talk about before. What was your experience with that when the book came out? And also to this day, I mean, you're out in the world talking to people all the time and having difficult conversations and encouraging people to talk about unspeakable stuff. So we've come across a lot of parents who are actually really resonating with the project that we're doing. And so I'd love to hear your experience with parents in general.
Well, it was on the bestseller list in the childcare and parenting category, so that should tell you something. I think that parents, I mean, first of all, they were curious about why people would make this choice, and obviously we all in life have this kind of sliding doors effect where we think about, well, what would have happened if I had gone this other way? And I think parents think about that a lot, especially parents of young kids who feel really overwhelmed. And I think that, what resonated for them about this book was that it was not, I don't know if it was, it was certainly not offensive. It wasn't saying you parents are a bunch of, frankly, selfish, taking up a lot of space consumers. I would not allow words like brats and breeders. I mean, there's this whole vernacular around the, kind of child-free conversation that I find really reductive and offensive, and it sells the entire conversation so short. I frankly don't like the term child-free. I know a lot of people use it, and it's easier because we haven't come up with a better thing. Childless by choice is very clumsy, but I actually prefer that. I don't like child-free because it's like gluten-free or smoke-free or something. Like, it puts parents on the defensive immediately. And so I think the fact that we didn't have that kind of thing made it very palatable to parents. And, honestly, I had a lot of people say to me, like, look, I have never thought about it this way before. Like, because what I'm trying to say is, people who choose not to have kids, it's a way of paying respect to parents. It's a way of saying this job is really, really hard, and it should be taken very seriously. And so people who don't want to do it shouldn't do it. Like, to me, that's the ultimate respect paid to parents. But unfortunately, so much of the rhetoric got bogged down into this stupid, glib, shallow kind of like Carrie Bradshaw, I'd rather have Manolo Blahniks than, have to like change a diaper. That's ridiculous. So I think we just need to be, more serious about this, quite honestly.
We've had similar experiences as well, when interacting with parents. When we were first telling people about this project, the people who we told last were our friends with kids. We're like, oh gosh, But yeah, there was a little bit of defensiveness, and Dan was like, but no, wait, we're not judging people who do have kids. Like, no, it's fine. This is just a space that we need who don't have kids by choice. This is just a space we need to do this and talk about this. And there was such a relief. And another thing we have found is that there have been several parents who have opened up with both of us about their regrets having children. And that is something that I've read, Regretting Motherhood, the Orna Dunoth study, and I've read about it in other articles and books too, though. For some reason, folks who are child-free by choice are just, I don't know, just some sort of a safe space for parents to talk about regret. And I love that. I love being able to hold the space for that and being like, hey, you know what? That's cool. Yeah. My gosh, being a parent, that's huge. Yes, I couldn't imagine not having any regrets about that. Um, so I think that's another important conversation to just bring out into the open.
Regret is a profound thing to admit. I mean, especially like in the culture now, it's so everything is framed around maximizing your potential and being positive and, only sort of thinking in the affirmative. And, to say I regret something, that there's no going, I mean, that's a pretty strong statement. But it also doesn't mean I don't love my life. Like, I regret so many things. I mean, the older you get, you just regret more and more. I mean, God, someday with the way the world is now, I mean, we're talking on a podcast. I regret becoming a writer a lot of the time. I'll be honest with you, because the business has changed. Audiences have changed. People don't read anymore. I mean, this is a whole other conversation. But, does that mean do I really regret it? Like, yes and no. We regret all kinds of things. But I mean, the thing with parents, and I think especially people with young kids, it's so hard. It's so intense. And in order to get through it, you often have to tell yourself that you had no other choice. Like, I am experiencing this intense difficulty because this is like, a mandate of human civilization. I am doing my duty. This is a natural imperative. And there was no alternative. And so then if you go to somebody and say like, hey, you actually didn't have to do this, or, if a person without kids is sort of being gloaty and, haha, I'm running off to Paris, that is a very negative dynamic. And of course, parents are going to be resentful. So again, I think that's why we just all have to be very open about our ambivalence about all kinds of things. Not everybody, it's like, it's Tom, this is like Thomas Sowell, the economist, there's no solutions, only trade-offs. And that's true across the board.
Yeah, and this is sending me on a little bit of a tangent too, because there is this I mean, in this conversation on this topic for sure, and then I think I can think of many others in my life where I have made a choice for myself or my life, or I'm making a decision, or I'm saying that I think this is the right thing to do for me. And there's this immediate sort of feeling like I need to defend that or be defensive about that. And when this idea of to like process my decision not to have children through by writing a letter to the children that I had decided not to bring into the world, to have just a conversation with the idea of those people, it really shifted it out of like, this isn't about me defending my choice to anyone else. This is about me making a decision with this, like we talked about the sliding doors, like the paths that I'm deciding not to take. I'm gonna pause here at my life at 37 or whenever I made that decision finally, and was like, okay, I want to acknowledge this path that I'm gonna say goodbye to. I'm gonna acknowledge this path and pause here and experience the grief and the vulnerability around that. And I think, especially in this conversation, a lot of times it's like, what's your decision, and defend your choice instead of, hey, it's a hard choice no matter what. And no matter what you do, it's going to be hard, and there's things you're going to miss out on. What if we just paused and supported everybody's like, the process of like grief and the process of letting go and okay, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to go down this path. I feel like there's a lot of that lost because everyone's just out in the world defending.
Yes. And social media has us curating everything. I mean, I would be very curious, like, if we could roll back the clock and, see how people would talk about this before Facebook, because we're just constantly bombarded with images of your perfect family, people who I know for a fact have a lot of problems in their families, struggling with their kids in myriad ways, often in real crisis mode. Then you'll see them on social media just looking like the Partridge Family. And it's like, wow, this will make anybody crazy. So if you are a young person and you're wanting to have a family and thinking, maybe you can't meet somebody, or maybe you're having fertility issues, whatever, and like you're going on social media every day on Instagram and looking at the images that families and parents have chosen to put forth, that will drive you insane. And that's a new phenomenon. And I just don't think that we've our brains have yet kind of wired up in a way that can absorb that and process it and separate the bogus part from the reality.
Yeah.
And speaking of community, these online communities, this kind of perfectly segues into the next question. So we were talking with somebody last week who she's 61. Well, she's 60, I guess technically. She's in her 61st year of life. And she's been, over the last few years, just so happy and relieved to have finally started speaking up about not having kids and making that choice not to have them. And she says that she's felt she's been able to do that only within the last few years. And something she said that really kind of struck me. She called women who are child free by choice an invisible community. And I never really thought about it in that way. But so we've connected with this community, mainly with the Marco Polo, with the private chat group. And it's been so empowering and enriching and something that I didn't even know I needed until we started getting into this work. Do you feel like you have a need for that community, or like you still have a need for this specific community? And if so, have you found a community, and how has that affected you?
This is a great question, because when I was working on the book, I was really struggling in my marriage around this issue. It was dominating my thinking. I would go online and type in, I regret having children, or I don't want to have children. Nothing made me happier than Reddit threads where anonymous people were saying how much they hated being a parent. I would just chew on that stuff all day. And the reason is that it was causing me personal pain. This was a terrible thing in my marriage. And I put the book out and everything. And, when I ended up getting divorced and that was over, it was instantly gone. I never thought about it again. So by the time I was sort of officially divorced, and I was 46, kind of 47. And not only was it not an issue biologically, probably not anyway, it just didn't matter. And in fact, I really rarely thought about it, and I did not see it as a political statement. I mean, it's funny, the child-free community, and again, we can talk about what community really means. I mean, that's a word, I think the way you're describing that makes sense. But insofar as there are organized child-free sort of groups, they don't like me anymore. First of all, because I don't like the word child-free, and I have said that. But also, I really just think that if you're going to normalize this choice, you have to stop talking about it. Just live your life. Live by example, and just be somebody in the world who's enjoying their life, and not constantly talking about this. But when you're in it and when you're suffering and when it's causing you a lot of pain, you have to talk about it all the time. And you have to sort of, feel, if you're defensive about it, obviously you're gonna want to defend yourself. And so, yes, that was useful to me for a while. And now I don't, it's like a complete nothing burger.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I can sense already just working on this project, and it's nearing its quote unquote end. I mean, we don't really know what's going to happen, but we're almost done with this, and just the experience of probably the same experience you had putting that book together, talking about it all these months, meeting all these people, sharing these stories, processing the decision, feeling like I can, like what you're saying, like I feel like I can just like live my life now. Like I'm not carrying this sort of like, oh, I don't know if I should say that I don't want to have kids. It's like, well, this is who I am, and now I'm going to go about my life. I do think that is uh the three of us here are like lucky or wise to have paused and at some point in our life and taken the time to process this, however it was, Reddit threads or put a book together or make a painting project, and now go out into the world. I do think about, and we're with you on this child-free, the verbiage there.
Right.
Gosh, Peggy O'Donnell Heffington's book, she talks about using the word non-parent, and I actually think I would like to switch to non-parent. And then it's parents and non-parents, and like that just feels so much less intense. And yeah, let's go about our lives and be a community in the sense of like, hey, you're my neighbor, you've got kids, do you need help with your kids? I don't have kids. I am available to help you in certain ways.
Right.
And because you do have children and have this other experience of the world, you'll be able to help me in different ways. So changing the language, I think, is a huge part of it. And then exactly what you're saying, like also then just go be a non-parent in the world, doing things.
And another point I really want to make is that kids really benefit from growing up in communities where there are adults around them who don't have kids. Like, it's so important to understand that there's a lot of ways of being an adult in the world. There's a lot of ways of being a responsible person. I grew up, partly in Austin, Texas in the 70s, and then we moved to suburban New Jersey, where there was not a single adult in the town who was not someone's mom or dad. It was a radical shift. So I went from being like surrounded by graduate students and professors and weird hippies and all kinds of people to like, these are the kids and these are the grownups. And it was a total binary and there was nothing else. And I just think it's so valuable for parents to have friends and aunts and uncles and relatives who are not parents, and to see that like everybody contributes. I mean, it does take a village. I'm really careful to say also that like just because you have kids doesn't mean you have to babysit. I mean, I'm not very good with kids. I mean, I am in some ways, but I'm not like a kid person. My brother does not have kids either. Like my parents were not kid people. That's probably a big reason that I didn't want to have kids. That's a whole other conversation. But there's just a lot of ways to live your life. And I think people lack imagination. And I also want to say, just, I do think this is crucial. Men who don't want to have kids have really been left out of the conversation. And I think in some ways it's harder for them. The conventional wisdom is that women get all the blame and all the pressures on women. And I think that's true in certain communities, and it's certainly been more true in the past. But women will get a you go girl around it. And men will get, you need to grow up. You're a Peter Pan. You're shirking responsibility. Man up. And I think that has to change. And that's why I purposely put a few men in the book. I mean, there were 3 men writing essays in the book and 13 women. So, that's another thing I think we need to be aware of.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Like a you go girl, that's great. Yeah, independent, you're living your life, and the guys get left behind a little bit.
Yeah.
And that also sort of segues into this other thing that we've talked a lot about, and I would love to hear your experience and thoughts on this who will take care of you when you're old question.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I don't really know. We haven't really explored the experience of men versus women on that question, but I know that that is such a big, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to you? And I mean, really, I just want to hear, what are your thoughts on that question? How have your thoughts changed? Where are you with it today? Yeah.
I mean, we're all getting older, right? So we think about it more as the years go on. Um, it is a concern. I mean, first of all, this is an obvious thing to say, but I'll say it. Having somebody to take care of you when you're old is not a good reason to have a child. I mean, we don't like make humans so they can be our hospice nurse. Um, but economically, it is a consideration. I mean, frankly, like I worry about this more from the perspective of I'm a freelance writer, like I'm a self-employed person and I'm single. I have no safety net. I have no family money. I've made certain financial decisions in my life that, possibly I should regret. I thought that the publishing economy was going to keep going the way it was, and now it's not. And my situation is not what I thought it would be. So yeah, but I don't, if I had kids, I would not want to put them in that position anyway. And obviously, there are a lot of people who have kids who those kids are not going to take care of them when they're old. And you just never know how things are going to turn out. I just personally am so not wired around family life that there's not a bone in my body that feels regret about like not being surrounded by a family when I'm dying or anything like that. Like it's just not how I am. But I can see how people might feel differently, but it's just we can't control these things. I mean, I guess mostly I would say make sure your finances are in order. Consider the fact that even if you're a starving artist, at least you were not a starving artist with kids to feed. And so take some of that money and invest it so you can help yourself when you're infirm.
Yeah, I feel like this there is there's like a bit of a fantasy thing around this whole conversation too. And oh, just because I have children, we're going to have this magical, beautiful, wonderful relationship. And when I need help, they're going to be there in a split second. And, of course, that is just not how it goes. And I really think part of wanting to bring these conversations out more in the public is to let people know who are maybe just on the fence. Um, hey, there's no guarantee. Like you said, there's no guarantee. It really has to be. It can't be based on some future fantasy idea you have about how your life is going to go. It has to be like, how do you want to live your life day to day, even if you're a starving artist, even if you're whatever, fill in the blank. Getting grounded in reality when making any kind of big life decision, but especially the decision to bring another entire human being into this crazy world.
Yeah, I mean, you could end up with a child who's dependent for life. I mean, there are more and more, there's so much more autism. There's a lot of, people are having kids older, and that creates a bunch of problems. I mean, another thing I want to emphasize, and this is something that I've really only thought more about in the last couple of years, because I do a podcast. I have two podcasts, The Unspeakable, but I also have this podcast I do with Sarah Hayter, who's 20 years younger than I am. It's called A Special Place in Hell. And we talk about culture war issues through the lens of our 20-year age difference. And she's very pro-natalist. She's an immigrant. Her parents were immigrants. She came to this country from Pakistan when she was 7. She comes from a big family. She's very, very concerned about population collapse, which is something that I poo-pooed until recently. It turns out that Paul Ehrlich was wrong. The population bomb has not really exploded in the directions that was predicted. A lot of people still have not gotten the memo. And it's obviously much more complicated than just saying, everybody should be having more kids. But I do think that the conversation should really be, instead of convincing more people to have kids, we should help people who want to have more kids to have more. Because I think what you're seeing is like a lot of people who do want to have large families, but they can't afford it, or they just don't have the support, or it is stigmatized, like women and men, couples that they have one kid or two kid, but they wish they could have four. And so I think that we need to start thinking that way. Like these issues are not going to be helped by the three of us having babies. What needs to happen is that we need to have our choices accepted, and then people who want to have larger families should be helped to do that. And this is again, the idea that there's that there's too many people in the world. I'm still learning about this, but it's really not as simple as that. So it's not like we don't need to be congratulating ourselves for controlling the population as much as I used to do that. That was my entire shtick. But
Yeah. We've talked about, and Tara, feel free to jump in. I know I'm going on tangents left and right. The fact that, yes, there's a sort of like, I need to go inward and talk about my decision for my little personal life, but also there's a bigger problem of like the lack of resources for people that do want to have children, and the lack of support and the lack of infrastructure. And so there are so many issues for the children we're bringing into this world that, like you're saying, maybe we could take some of that energy of like, yay, I'm gonna, have these fancy vacations, instead being like, well, how can we fix some of these problems that exist to support the people that
right.
want to keep having kids?
If you're not defensive about it, if you're not defensive about your choice, you can think about this stuff a lot more clearly. Like I just had a guest on and we talked about JD Vance with the childless cat lady thing. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that bro podcasters talk about. And now it just happens to be out in the open and people are like, what? Oh my God. But there's nothing that JD Vance has said that Sarah, my podcast partner, doesn't say to me every week. Okay. Like basically people with kids are better than people without kids, or people with kids deserve tax credits, and they should be, but we already have that. That's totally fine with me. I don't care at all. I feel like my life is like so much easier because I don't have kids. I have no problem helping parents, and I don't even have a problem if parents want to be smug about it. Like that is their thing. And so I think that like when the childless people get really upset and angry and indignant about this, and how dare you call me a childless cat lady, and it's just, think about why you're doing that. Because if you were really happy being a childless cat lady, I'm a childless dog lady, you'd be like, fine, have at it.
Right.
I'm here with my dog.
Right.
Yeah, I love I think you just having a sense of humor about everything too, not taking anything too seriously. And just to backtrack a little bit, I think it's important to not be glib. Like you're saying, like you said earlier, oh, I don't have kids because I want to go to Paris or whatever. I think it's important to not be glib, but it's also important to have a sense of humor. Like, okay, yeah, childless cat lady, yes. And I love cats so much, like so much, and being okay with that.
Yeah. People can smell defensiveness on other people miles away. And I mean, it's amazing because I have not, again, maybe it's because I'm older, but I never get any flack from anybody about this. And I'm very much with this other podcast, a lot of our audience is actually in this kind of red pill, the new political right space, because that's some of Sarah's audience. I mean, she's not really that way herself, but she has a lot of fans in that space. And I don't think they care. They're like, whatever. Like, Meghan is not the problem. Like, let's think about other things.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess just it's so interesting talking to you because you're 10 years ahead of where we are right now in terms of we're processing this right now with this project. And yeah, what do you feel like are the ideally you make this decision, you move on with your life. Have you what do you feel like has been the biggest area of growth for you around this conversation? I guess just fully accepting it and kind of like getting over it.
Yeah. And, understanding that, not only that there's all sorts of ways to be a family, but like no one ever really gets this right. Like no one, there's no perfect way to do this. One of the ways I sort of worked through this is I was a volunteer in the foster care system. So I wrote about this in my other book, in The Unspeakable, and I was a CASA, which is a court-appointed special advocate. And you're not really a mentor. You're sort of a mentor to the foster kid, but it's a pretty comprehensive volunteer position, and you really start to understand like the inner workings of the child dependency system. And, I used to have very romantic ideas about adoption, for instance, and adoption of older kids. That was one of the things that my husband and I went through for a while. Like, oh, okay, well, we're not going to have our own kids, but maybe we were both sort of ambivalent. Like, well, maybe if we adopted older kids, then we wouldn't have to be with them as long. Like, I'm like, this is a workaround, sort of. Like, they're already 16, so whatever, And so, when as soon as I sort of got into that world, I just saw that like this is an entirely different way of being a parent. Like if you're gonna be a foster parent or adopt out of that system, that is fantastic. The people who do it well and do it for the right reasons are amazing and unique, but they are having a different experience than having children biologically and raising them, or even adopting infants and raising them. Like it's no better or worse of an experience value-wise, but it's not the same. So I just think we need to be very honest about what that means. And I mean, the adoption thing, I mean, I think like we've learned a lot over the last couple decades about the ramifications of that, about overseas adoption. And again, I think we were very, very naive as Westerners about what that means. That's a whole other conversation. But what I can't stand is when people say, "Oh, I don't want kids, but maybe I'll just adopt later." Well, that is having kids.
Right.
You are a parent.
It really comes down to how you want to like live your life and spend your time. That was something I used to say to like throw people off my scent for a long time. Like, oh, I don't know. I don't really know if I want to do that, but maybe I'll change my mind someday. And if it's too late for me to have my own, then I'll just adopt. But like,
Yes,
that was not me being honest with myself about the life that I wanted to build and create for myself. And yeah, a lot of it is just getting older and getting to know yourself better. But I think realizing that there are choices. You have a choice. You don't have to just plan different ways that you might have children later down the road.
yeah.
I'm scared to say, actually, that's not the life I want to live.
I know. My big fantasy was that my husband would like get a phone call, and then it would be some like 19-year-old who he didn't know about, that he had like knocked up some woman 20 years ago. And suddenly he had a child. Like that would have been great because like he wanted adult children. That's what he wanted.
Yeah, problem solved. I didn't have to do anything. Just deliver someone to my doorstep that I have to take care of.
Just in time to pay for college. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we have one more question, and I think I might know at least part of the answer, but I'm still going to ask this. So would you consider making a sequel to the 2015 book? And if you were to make a sequel, what would you do differently? How would you do it differently?
Wow. Well, I mean, it was an anthology. So, I mean, I guess one version would be trying to track down all these writers and get them to write about it again. That's not going to happen. I really have never thought about it. I mean, I suppose, it would be, as you get older, like, I mean, not having grandchildren is a kind of a thing. I mean, again, like that's just not something that I care about at all. I did not have a close relationship with my own grandparents. It's just not part of my thinking. But I think for a lot of people, maybe they're starting to, this is a new thing then to work through. Like they've happily made the decision not to have kids, but then, they get into their 50s or 60s and suddenly the Facebook, Instagram family portraits are not just like screaming 2-year-olds, they're adorable grandchildren. And they go, oh, maybe they have to maybe process this all over again. I don't know.
Yeah, like a next generation of like, okay, confronting this decision. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I think that the conversation is so different around this because right now there are a lot of young people. It is cool to say that you don't want kids. They're embarrassed to say that they do. I mean, this is a huge problem. Like in sort of more affluent liberal circles, there's a huge stigma on young women, especially if they say they want to get married and have kids. I mean, this is a big thing that the pronatalists talk about, and I think the pronatalists have a very good point. So I think that we would have to sort of come at it from a different angle. Yeah, I think this has changed a lot. I mean, I used to joke that from people like back in the 90s and stuff would say like, I'm not going to have kids because of climate change. I was like, that's stupid. No, I don't believe anybody who says that. And now people say that all the time. And I think they really do mean it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe for good reasons, maybe not. But this whole thing has changed so much. But that's why it's so important to be nuanced about it. That's everything. Don't be dogmatic. Don't be glib. Don't make a joke about it. Just saying to somebody, you know what, I thought about it and it wasn't for me is so profound and can do so much to reshape their thinking, as opposed to saying like, hey, look at my expensive apartment sort of thing.
Right. Like living the choice to the fullest, like almost, and this has come up in a lot of the surveys and the letters to people's, quote unquote, unborn children is like, I'm living my life in your honor. Like I made this decision and now I'm going to live my life fully and confidently in that decision in a way because I chose not to bring you here. I'm going to really, and show by example, like this is an option and it's doable and it's viable and it's
like, that's the other thing is like, I used to say like, it wouldn't be a good use of my time. I mean, honestly, like if I was a mother, and to be clear, I'm sure I would have risen to the occasion. I would have loved my child, of course, but I don't think I would have loved my life. And I don't think that I would be contributing to the world in the way that's best for me. I would be busy taking care of this person. And I wouldn't be doing stuff that I think might be more beneficial.
Yeah.
That's at least my thinking. I mean, who knows? I could be wrong.
Yeah, and thinking about like what is my skill set, what's my experience, what's my upbringing, what do I have to offer to this world that I'm in? And I know people who are excellent mothers who are raising beautiful children and their skill set is like meant for helping raise children that are going to do good in this world. I would have lost my mind. And so it's a great thing that I didn't do that because I can use my skill set for these better, to be put to better use. And like you're saying, like, let's try to look at how everyone's contributing and support the ways that people have chosen to contribute and like highlight their skills and be grateful for everyone's skills. We're all contributing. We all need each other and we need these kids too.
Yep. Great. It's such a great topic, isn't it? Because it's really not, it's at the end of the day, it's not about choosing to have kids or not. It's about choosing how you want to live your life.
Yeah.
That's why the conversation is so fascinating. And that's why parents are just as interested in it as non-parents, because it's about how you want to be in the world.
Yes.
And that's a universal question.
That was such a fascinating conversation.
So good.
There's so much more to think about, so much more research I want to dig into. I'm so thankful for her time with us.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Hope you all enjoy, and we can't wait for the next episode.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Letters to Our Unborn Children podcast. To learn more about today's conversation, visit our podcast page at weownthistown.net/shows.
To learn more about the Letters Project or to join the private video chat group for child-free women, join our email list at letterstourunbornchildren.com.